Okay, let's finish up defining our world here. We only have 2 more steps. Step number 2, define gravity. Gravity is a b2 vector. And given that most things fall straight down, the x value will be 0. And the y value, now I know I just spent most of the last video talking about how you should define everything in pixels and then convert it into meters. Now I'm going to break that rule and just put down gravity as 9.8 meters a second in the y direction because I remember that fact from physics class, and it seems weird to put it in pixels. So anyway, this last thing is a flag basically telling the world whether we want it to ignore sleeping objects. Once an object has basically come to rest and it has no velocity, no acceleration, there's nothing acting upon it, Box2D will basically say, okay, this object is asleep, and that's Box2D's way of trying to speed up calculations by ignoring things that it knows aren't moving. So basically, this makes things run a little faster, so we're going to set it to true. The only reason you might not want to do this is because there are certain situations where you have to wake an object up manually if you want Box2D to start paying attention to it again. Now Box2D is pretty smart. If you hit a sleeping object with a moving object, Box2D will know to wake up the sleeping object. But if you were to say try and move the object because you clicked on it, or it responds to user commands or something that the Box2D world wouldn't necessarily know about, you do have to go in there and you have to manually tell it to wake up that sleeping object. It's not a big deal. It's a slight pain in the butt, but it's worth the time savings that you'll get by telling Box2D to ignore the sleeping objects. So now that we finally got all this, let's create our world variable. It's our new b2World. We need the world AABB, which is this universe size. We need the gravity. And we need to tell it whether to ignore sleeping bodies. We do that. We're done. We'll save it. I'm going to hit F6 and Flash Develop. That should bring up Flash. And wow, that's kind of boring given all the work we put in. But somewhere in the background, you've got a b2World object ready to simulate anything you want to put into it. Well, given that it's in there, let's try and show a little something for our work. I'm going to close this. Let's just add a trace statement. And I'm going to call up world and get body count. This is a little function that basically gets the number of bodies that are included in this world. This probably won't be very interesting, but let's run it. And, well, actually, that is kind of interesting. Our output tells us that our world has 1 body in it. You might not expect that given that we haven't actually added any to the world, but it turns out when you create a world, Box2D automatically creates this body called the ground body. It's kind of a weird concept to get used to at first. Basically, you can think of the ground body. I like to think of it as, see this giant white square that's taking up the whole background of my little Flash movie? I like to think of that as the ground object. It's basically sort of an object that is everywhere and nowhere all at once. Kind of like the Force, I guess. If you wanted to, say, pin an object to the world, maybe, you know, like I had a little square here and I wanted to act like there was a little thumbtack in it, sticking it into the world, the thing I would basically do is I would attach it to this b2World object. So it's kind of a weird concept. You don't have to worry about it too much now. We might hit on it a little later. But in case you're wondering why this completely empty world has 1 body in it, that's why. So, alright, we've got our ground body in here. Let's start putting in some walls and a floor and get some real bodies in this thing. Coming up next.